Hello everyone, I'm Noctowls, and welcome to another match analysis for the Newport Noctowls in Season 12 of the Whooper Club League. Last week I took on the Zanesville Zigzagoons, where I took the game 6-0 on turn 20. This time I'm facing off against Joey and the Akron Aggrons, probably the most threatening team yet. I've met Joey quite a few times in the WCL. My first draft experience was in Season 8, where we met in the semifinals, where I took a 4-0 win after 50 turns of defensive pivoting and positioning. Then in the multi-battle Season 9, he took both regular season matches against me, but then I 6-0'd him and John in the playoffs alongside Logic. Then in the low-tier Season 10, we actually met in Week 1 and engaged in the only terrain war of that season, with my Pinkerton's electric terrain put up against his Thwacky's grassy terrain, and I got away with a tight 3-0 victory there. We've played some pretty good matches, some of my favorite that I've played in draft, but at least in singles I've had them all go my way recently. That's what I'm hoping to keep up here, but Joey has drafted a very threatening roster this time around. He's got a team of Cinderace at the top of the speed tiers, followed by Screamtail, Zoroark, Baxcalibur, Bisharp, Wo-Chien, Skeledirge, Donphan, Electros, Slowking, and Clodsire. And wow, this has got to be the bulkiest team in the league this season. 2 unaware walls with Skeledirge and Clodsire, the sheer bulk of Screamtail, Wo-Chien, and Regenerator Slowking, and Baxcalibur, despite being a gigantic offensive threat, becomes a lot more defensive with support from Slowking's chilly reception as well. And after all that, the team's still really well-rounded, with Cinderace and Screamtail outspeeding everything, while Baxcalibur and Skeledirge make for insane win conditions. It's a tough team to break through. I'm going to need to pick my brings carefully, balancing strong breakers with the defensive utility I need to avoid getting steamrolled by his offense. As for his side, I'm going to go into it. Bisharp stands out as a little underwhelming in this matchup. Eviolite adds to the bulk on Joey's team, but Bisharp itself does lose a lot of individual matchups against me, the most important being Great Tusk, which Bisharp invites in almost for free. It's right next to the other lower tier dark type in Zoroark, which packs some neat tricks, Illusion can force some mind games, and Nasty Plot is also a great setup on the special side, but despite my team's lackluster special defense, I have some hard checks to this. Tyranitar and Iron Moth stand out as 2 picks that would give it a lot of trouble. Moving on, it's tough to pick between the other 9 Pokemon, but I'll go with Slowking, I guess. It's obviously a neat, especially defensive piece that has Regenerator and checks Iron Moth, but I'll be honest, I think there are other defensive Pokemon, mostly Clodsire, that also check Iron Moth and might be able to do a little more for his team. Slowking definitely wouldn't be a bad choice. It has some options. Chilly Reception, Pivoting, and Calm Mind are both great sets, but I'm still a little more afraid of Clodsire filling that specially defensive niche, and we'll get to that in a bit. Donphan is next, and once again, this is tough to cut out, right? Its base 120 attack and defense are always impressive, and it can use that to be a pretty good physical tank and reliable hazard remover in the matchup. I guess the problem is that it doesn't handle any one matchup particularly well, aside from maybe T-Tar. Great Tusk obviously kind of eclipses it, but I have other physical tanks that could beat it, as well as Hydreigon and Iron Moth outspeeding and doing massive damage. I'm not sure how much it could really accomplish. And then, I know how much we all love Wo-Chien, but I'll have to pass. It's the counterpart to Ting Lu, also with Titanic Bulk, and as well as Leech Seed, which could actually be pretty annoying, but that Grass Dark typing really does cut it to its viability. If you're looking for something on my team that doesn't exploit this or threaten it out, you'll have to go all the way down to my 6th draft pick with Dondozo. Yeah, most of my team has easy access to super effective moves that give this slug a hard time. I'm still hesitant to cut it. This is Joey's 3rd and most defensive dark type that I'm claiming doesn't come against a team with a Poltegeist and a Fergraph. It's also one of his only ground resists to stop Great Tusk from spamming Headlong Rush, and Wo-Chien's bulk, it really is something. But I think it just has too many flaws and weaknesses to make use of those traits too well. Instead, I'd suggest a different way to stop Headlong Rush spam with the unique Electros starting that 6 that I'm most afraid of. This is Joey's only ground immunity, and because of that, it can force some guessing games onto Great Tusk, which would otherwise have a great time spamming ground moves. It's also just a scary Pokemon to switch into. Its offensive stats are solid, and it can definitely fit coverage for my entire team, with strong electric moves plus surprising miscoverage with Flamethrower, Giga Drain, Dragon Pulse, Close Combat, and Liquidation, among others. If I can't KO this with whatever I have out, it has the potential to bust a hole through my team. The same can absolutely be said about Baxcalibur, Joey's round 1 pick, with its base 145 attack stat and powerful Stab, Glaive Rush, and Dragon Dance to boost. But I actually do have some of the best answers to it in the game, as long as it isn't terastallizing, so that does make this a pretty good Terra candidate, maybe with Fire for Fortress, or Electric for the Water types. So yeah, despite my team being pretty well prepared for it, it could just go on a tear if it's given the right opportunity. I'll have to prepare correctly for that. Up next is going to be Clodsire. This is the first part of Joey's Unaware core, but I actually think it has a decent water absorb set this week to be a better Azumarill check. With its natural bulk, it pretty easily switches into Iron Moth, Hydreigon, and Rotom, and from there it has any number of things it can do. It can set up a whole field of hazards, lay down a Toxic, and just continuously heal up with their cover. This is one of those pieces that is going to be a huge pain to break through. Speaking of which, Screamtail is also a gigantic pain to break through. This is actually in part because I have such a hard time hitting it safely. Its Psychic Fairy typing means that its stab coverage hits a lot of my best Pokemon super effectively. So despite its low attacking stats, its damage output is quite good in this matchup, and it's also outspeeding just about all my team, beating Iron Moth by 1 base point. It has so many movesets it can run too. I've been trying to figure out what 4 moves it'll run. Dual screens are always an option, but I also don't think he'll have the space to run them comfortably. I feel like he'll want at least 1 stab move, maybe 2, and it's got to have Wish plus maybe Protect, and then from there you can also run Stealth Rock or Thunder Wave. That's just so many possibilities, and when they're also hard to deal with, this is such a good Pokemon in the matchup. Next up is Cinderace, which also takes advantage of its high speed, but fills a much more offensive role. Its Libero, I don't know. Libero boosted attacks can hit very hard, and my main defensive answers to it are just bait for U-turn to get Joey into a better matchup. I think that this would be its game plan. Force switches while it can either U-turn out for free damage and momentum, or swap hazards off of its side of the field with Court Change. And then in the late game, if the right walls are chipped down, this can just be a great cleaner with its speed, power, and access to priority Sucker Punch. That adds up to a very threatening attacker. Although nothing is as threatening to me as that Skeledirge. It is first and foremost an unaware wall, and it might look unassuming with good but not stellar defenses, and an exploitable typing for a decent part of my team, but those defenses are just good enough to be tough to break past, and I would be very surprised if this keeps its original typing for the whole match. Fire Ghost is pretty vulnerable to Hydreigon, Azumarill, and Great Tusk, as well as probably Tyranitar, but I think this is the most likely Terra candidate to be able to sit in front of all those things to spread burns with Will-O-Wisp, and then start hitting me back hard with boosted Hexes and Torch Songs. This is a boosting threat that I don't have that much counterplay for, because I actually found out in my prep that Hex does get boosted by Sleep, meaning that Dondozo can't just sit in front of it with Unaware Rest. It's doing too much damage. Because of its ability to wall and sweep with one set, I'm going to need to build a significant part of my team to be able to handle it. So yeah, I have a lot of wall breaking to do in this matchup, and I'm going to start off my build right with that, with Azumarill, going pretty offensive here with max attack and enough speed to creep Wo-Chien. The set itself is pretty standard. Dual stabs do great damage into just about everything. Aqua Jet picks off weakened threats and heavily threatens Cinderace. And Ice Spinner is my one coverage move specifically for Water Absorb Clodsire. And then Terra Water boosts up the power of Liquidation and Aqua Jet nicely, making for an even better wall breaking. If I can get Azumarill into a position where it threatens a KO on something, Joey really doesn't have defensive switch-ins to this. Play Rough looks pretty freeing to this team, with any resists getting smacked by a follow-up water move. I'm not really planning on using Azumarill defensively, it's more for breaking purposes, but its bulk and typing mean that it still has a lot of utility against Baxcalibur and Cinderace, and an added Lumberry in the item slot means that Azu can fire off attacks into the Skeledirge as well without fear of a Will-O-Wisp. It's a pretty basic set, but a basic Azumarill set does look like it has a great matchup here. With Azumarill being used for more offensive purposes, I still want a bulky utility water type, so Dondozo fits in right as the next pick. I did just say Azu has some defensive utility against Baxcalibur and Cinderace, but I don't want to rely on such an important offensive piece to handle those, so here's my default switch-in. Dondozo's job is to sit in front of that Baxcalibur and Cinderace with its bulk and Unaware to take pressure off the rest of my team. Liquidation and Body Press hit those two back hard, and Rest Talk with Leftovers should help with longevity. I also have just enough special defense to avoid the 2-hit KO from Skeledirge's boosted Hex in case that comes up. The Terra type is Fairy. I don't expect to use it, but it does get rid of the usual water weakness while also keeping a good matchup against Baxcalibur. Another pretty standard set, but it does look pretty nice here. With two bulky water types to start my build, Electros and Wo-Chien were looking pretty threatening, so I decided to grab this backup check with Hydreigon. I'm running an offensive spread, but since I only need speed for Baxcalibur, I was able to get some extra HP investment, and it makes Hydreigon surprisingly bulky along with Leftovers. We should be able to switch in on Electros, Slowking, Wo-Chien, Zoroark, and maybe even Donphan with the Levitate ability. And from there, we have a lot of utility. Hydreigon is my Stealth Rock setter for the matchup, and it's also a taunt user, and that's mainly to prevent slower threats from healing up with their recovery moves. Dark Pulse hits almost everything for great damage, and Flash Cannon rounds up the 2-move coverage by getting super effective damage on Screamtail, Baxcalibur, and Terra Fairy Skeledirge, which Joey has steamed to favor. Lastly, the Terra type here is Steel, and this is my most likely Terra if Screamtail gets out of control. Other than that, going for Terra definitely makes me worse against Eelektross and Skeledirge, but also gives me a better matchup against Baxcalibur and Clodsire. So it's a trade-off, but I think I like the benefits, so this is a very likely Terra candidate. Because of that, I'll want another check to Eelektross, but we'll get to that in a bit. For now, I'm going to run with another Wall Breaker with Great Tusk. I'm running Soft Sand because a boosted Headlong Rush absolutely goes in against this team. The only resists are Wo-Chien and Eelektross, neither of which can take a close combat very well, so Great Tusk could be claiming a lot of KOs here. Knockoff is a good utility attack to remove things like leftovers, and it also threatens big damage onto Slowking, and then of course Rapid Spin to make Great Tusk a hazard remover once again. We switch in pretty well on Clodsire and threaten it out while spinning anything it might have set up. If Screamtail or Donphan end up being his Stealth Rock setters, that's less ideal, but Great Tusk can still find opportunities to spin. Spinning also sets up for a potential late game sweep since I have enough speed to outrun Cinderace at +1. And finally, Terra Ground for obvious reasons. Let's see if ground spam works against this team. Next up is going to be Tyranitar. Setup is tough to do against Joey's team, but this is a very unique setup piece. It's mostly here to bait in Skeledirge on a Dragon Dance, force it to Terrastalize out of its Ghost typing against the incoming Stone Edge, and then use its Will-O-Wisp against it with Terra Normal Facade. If I manage to get 2 Dragon Dance boosts and muscle my way past the Skeledirge, it could be a full sweep from there depending on what's still on the board. That use is a bit silly, but this is also just a nice bulky check to things like Eelektross or Zoroark in a pinch, especially with our natural bulk and leftovers. And then finally in the last slot we have Iron Moth with a pretty bulky set. Enough speed for Zoroark, but other than that, max HP and the rest in defense so that this can be a decent switch in to most Eelektross and Screamtail sets. Overheat is my best move in the matchup. Despite no special attack investment, Iron Moth still hits pretty hard, and Overheat special attack drops are actually ignored by Unaware, which might come in handy in this matchup. Sludge Wave is a more consistent move and gets more damage onto Screamtail, and between those two moves, Iron Moth can hit Joey's whole team hard except for the Skeledirge, which honestly can't really hit me back anyway, and then also Clodsire, which I have other answers for. U-turn keeps momentum up, and Morning Sun means that Iron Moth can continue to switch in on Eelektross, Skeledirge, and Screamtail throughout the whole game. Terra Fire isn't something I plan on using, but sheds our Psychic weakness and it can power up Overheat if I need some extra oomph. That's going to be it for the team. Joey has a pretty bulky squad, but I'm also running a lot of bulk to hopefully keep up with it. Let's get right into the battle. Slowking and Donphan are here, which means no Clodsire. That makes enough sense. Clodsire's role is kind of filled out by those two, but it also means no Cinderace is here. That's really nice, and it takes a lot of pressure off of Dondozo. It also makes Iron Moth look amazing, since now the only thing that outspeeds it is a Screamtail that definitely isn't as threatening towards it. Okay, leads. I went back and forth between Iron Moth and Hydreigon, since both outspeed everything for the Screamtail, but I'm going with Iron Moth specifically for that Screamtail matchup. Good luck to Joey. And it's going to be the Eelektross that leads off. That's fine. I have to imagine this is a special set that it's running, so Iron Moth is kind of my answer to it already. Let's just fire off on Overheat and see what happens. Does almost 70%. Iron Moth is strong, as Eelektross Volt switches out into Slowking. The damage from both hits would suggest that the Eelektross is near max HP, and it also has to be choice specs, which is good to know. So that's knowledge and a ton of chip on turn 1. I'll definitely take it. As for dealing with the Slowking, I'd love to heal up right now, but I can't risk it. Time for a safe U-turn out to my natural answer, which will be Hydreigon. That's going to come in, and the Slowking is just going to go for Chilly Reception, so this probably isn't the Calm Mindset, and that brings in the Screamtail. Well, I do have Terra Steel to deal with this, but I'm still holding out for my Terra Normal Tyranitar in the back, so let's try to find a different answer. That is going to be tough though. Iron Moth would quad resist the likely Dazzling Gleam, but a Thunder Wave instead would be terrible for me. Instead, I'm going to go with Dondozo, who shouldn't take much from any move, but it is just going to be a Wish. Okay, I don't love that. Eelektross is the only possible recipient right now, and I can't necessarily KO it on the switch. Well, actually looking at the calcs, Liquidation looks like it might be a roll to KO the Electros from this range, so let's go for that and prevent a free Wish Pass. Reflect! And my Liquidation does crit, but that literally doesn't matter with the Wish going off right after that. This is really bad. I didn't expect him to bring screens on Screamtail, so I don't have any way around this. And since I don't see leftovers, I don't know if there was an opportunity to see leftovers, but anyway, I'm assuming this has to be Light Clay. That is going to be really tough to play around, but at least on the bright side, I have to guess this full set is Wish, Dual Screens, and either Protect or Dazzling Gleam, so Iron Moth is a pretty safe switch in. But he's just going to double into the Skeledirge, and I really can't do much here. I would love to heal up with Morning Sun, but that's actually only healing for 1/4 until the snow is over. I think I'm just going to pivot out and try again later. So I'll go ahead and hit the Skeledirge with the most resisted U-turn I've ever seen, and Hydreigon will come in on the Will-O-Wisp, which actually does miss. That's very nice, not going to lie. Obviously Hydreigon doesn't care about the lowered attack, but keeping my leftovers recovery is going to be pretty useful, I gotta say. The Skeledirge does actually reveal that it has leftovers to get back to full there, so it's not boots, which is good to know. I feel like then rocks are going to be important to set up, and this is a pretty free opportunity in front of the Skeledirge. Screamtail is going to come back in as those go up, and once again I'm tempted to turn myself into the Screamtail counter with Terra Steel, but I'm still holding out for that Tyranitar strategy. In fact, this could be a T-Tar opportunity right here, so I'm just going to switch as the Screamtail decides to Wish up. Maybe this is a chance to boost up, so I'll try it. But of course, Donphan is the natural answer to this kind of set. Even with a boost, I'm not doing anything to this behind Reflect, and Earthquake threatens a KO right back, so I just have to get out of here for now. Dondozo should be able to take any hit from this, but it's actually going to be the knockoff with crit that removes my leftovers. That kind of sucks. The next turn is going to be Donphan getting a free Rapid Spin, but in return, my Liquidation that I clicked actually gets to crits through the Reflect. That's huge and a really lucky break for me. Donphan being at low health is amazing, especially for the Tyranitar. It's going to switch out for something here. And the Slowking comes in as I just went for another Liquidation to keep up the pressure. And from here, I have a few options to deal with this. But I think I can drop a Azumarill in relatively safely, since Slowking probably isn't going for anything too threatening right now. That is going to be in on the future site. I might have to worry about that in a second, but for now I can go for a pretty free Play Rough. That does a very solid 62% before Slowking just pivots out to Electros. That's not a problem at all. I should win this matchup given the circumstances. I know Electros is probably max HP, max special attack thanks to the damage rolls from earlier, and Azumarill is actually EV to be pretty fast, so I should outspeed this every time and KO with Liquidation. But then I thought, what if somehow it is faster than me? I could click Aqua Jet instead, and checking the calcs, I saw that Aqua Jet does around 35% at minimum to max HP Electros. So if Aqua Jet KOs no matter what, why not go for it? Aqua Jet leaves Electros at 5%, Giga Drain gets it back up to 42, and Azumarill goes down to the future site. Yeah, that was real bad. Looking back at the calcs, I'm pretty sure I was accidentally looking at the standard Choice Band Azumarill set instead of my own Lumberry set, which would account for the difference in damage. And on top of that, Joey did confirm after the battle that Electros had no speed investment, so I was so safe just going for Liquidation there. But instead I overthought it and messed up my calc, so Azumarill is down. There goes my main wall breaker and one of my best Excalibur checks, and Electros is still alive and healthier than ever. That was a very egregious misplay, but I just kind of have to move on. My revenge could be just about anything, but I'll go with Great Tusk, which threatens big damage onto Joey's whole team. Headlong Rush would be a very bold play right now to catch any switch in, but if Joey does stay in, Specs Giga Drain, would hurt. So I'm just going to go for close combat, but of course that goes into the Screamtail, which quad resists, and my defenses drop in front of a potential Dazzling Gleam on the next turn. Despite that, I kind of want to stay in and knock off here. Dazzling Gleam would do a lot, but it can't KO me, and knocking off the Light Clay seems like it's going to be very important for the long game. That said, I really like to avoid damage, so here's hoping a Gleam doesn't come out. Just a wish. Good. And knockoff does actually crit, that's pretty cool. But more importantly, that light clay is gone, thank goodness. I get to switch out here into T-Tar on the next turn, as Screamtail gets off a Reflect. And this switch in was mostly for scouting purposes. I want to make sure that it's got Fairy and not Psychic as its offensive move before sending in Iron Moth. Now that Tyranitar is in though, it definitely can't be going for a Psychic move here, so I'm just going to double into Iron Moth as the Screamtail does get another Wish off. I'm once again pretty motivated to prevent Joey from undoing the progress I've made on Electros a Donphan. This is actually the main reason I brought Iron Moth in. Overheat should KO either Wish target on the switch, but it's just going to be a light screen, so I don't do much damage to the Screamtail at all. And now he's very free to go for like an actual Wisp Pass. As he does it again, I guess I'm just going to go Dondozo here, but of course on Dondozo, Electros can come in pretty free behind the screens. And despite the small damage I did, it's back to very healthy numbers. That's real bad. Honestly, Joey just played those turns really well, and it just ended up being a pretty effective Wish Pass. So I have to deal with a Specs Electros now, and my safest switch is going to be Hydreigon. We'll come in on the Volt switch without taking too much damage, and Screamtail's back in, and you know what, enough is enough. It's Terra Steel time, as the Screamtail, it does actually reveal Dazzling Gleam, and I get to get my rocks up pretty free. Next step, Joey is going to get his light screen back up, but I get to taunt to stop anything else it wants to do. Yeah, that's right, Hydreigon is basically a Screamtail counter at this point. So a switch is pretty much guaranteed, and Dark Pulse looks like free chip damage. And that's actually on the Electros, which takes those rocks, and then goes down to about half. And if this is coming in, I have to assume it's for that Flamethrower damage, which I know it does get, so I would like to stay far away from that with my Hydreigon. Tyranitar is going to be the easy switch in. And it is just a Flamethrower. Joey actually commented right afterwards that he should have gone for Giga Drain, and yeah, that would have been real bad if he did. Dragon Dance looks decently free to go for here, especially with that Donphan down low, and I do get it on the Skeletor switch in. It takes that rocks damage. Okay, I can't Terra, but I'll still attempt the plan. Stone Edge should be my strongest move into this. And can I get that off? It does Terra Fairy, I was right. Stone Edge is for 38%, and the Will-O-Wisp does go off. That is a very physically defensive Skeletor. Unfortunately, that probably means Facade won't kill. We're currently at base 140 power with that move, as opposed to Stab Stone Edge, which was base 150. But it's worth a try. Facade is going to be the next move I click. And it does, unfortunately, leave him at 4% and allows him to heal back up. That's too bad, but what I decided to do with this is that I can force Skeletors to keep healing up by just going for more Facades. I probably won't be able to take this down, but I can force it to either switch out or run it out of its 8 slack off PP. It's gonna be starting to go for Torch Songs here to boost itself up, but that's not the most concerning thing in the world. T-Tar still won't take too much from it with a resist to both stabs, especially because at some point here I do decide to pivot in and out safely just to get the sand back up. There's just a couple more Facades here as it continues to boost, and once Tyranitar gets a little low and I recognize that I kind of need the stand chip to keep up with his recovery, I am going to bring in Dondozo as safely on the slack off, and then Tyranitar can just come right back in on the baited attack, which was just a Will-O-Wisp. Yeah, for the better or worse, I am kind of in this for the long haul. The goal is to run the Skeletors out of its healing, and because it's physically defensive, one Facade's worth of damage will be enough to keep it in range of the Revenging Iron Moth if I just go down as it attacks me or something. Looking back at this, I do think I should have swapped to Iron Moth earlier on just to preserve Tyranitar. It still has some decent use in the matchup just using Facade, but like I keep saying, I'm not too upset about losing T-Tar like this. At the end of this exchange, Skeletor is going to be left with 1 slack off PP, and its Terastallization has been forced out at this point, which is great. Terra Fairy is actually kind of exploitable, especially for Iron Moth. And despite how boosted it is, there's nothing it can really do about that Revenging Iron Moth as soon as I get that in. I'm kind of out of notes to pull from here, so I'm just waiting for the Skeletors to KO Tyranitar. Give it a second. But, I mean, I think this might be the turn where it just decides to KO me. Yes, it is. So Iron Moth does get to come in. It is super boosted, but it doesn't matter. We should get the KO every time. We force it out with Sludge Wave as the Slowking comes in to take it. That was kind of the only switch in Joey had at this point. And with his leftovers, we actually do barely miss the 2-hit KO from this range. Because of that, I thought he was going to heal up, so I decided to heal up on my own. So that's what just happened. We both went for recovery this turn. And I am back to pretty healthy numbers with Iron Moth. That's nice. From here, once again, I'm not too afraid of Slowking's offense, so I do feel pretty safe to U-turn out into Hydreigon. Do some decent damage and get that in, as he's actually going to pivot out as well. This time into Baxcalibur, which actually does show heavy-duty boots on the rocks. This is an interesting matchup. It makes me very happy that Joey's Terra has already been forced, because looking through Baxcalibur's move pool, the strongest move it can go for here is Brick Break, which I can take one of. The main question is what I'm going for here. It's kind of a 50-50. I should taunt if I think Dragon Dance is coming, or I should Flash Cannon if I think he's just going for an attack. I decided on Flash Cannon, mostly because it's guaranteed to do something, whereas Taunt could possibly be wasting a turn if he attacks. That is actually going to do some great damage, but that is a Dragon Dance in return. Okay, that's a bit of a problem. Adamant Brick Break looks like a roll to KO here, and with my resources being pretty limited at the moment, and Hydreigon looking amazing against the rest of his team, I don't think I can just risk it going down like that. So instead, I'm going to swap to Dondozo, which should barely be able to take a Brick Break into a Glaive Rush. We come in at above half, but it is just going to be a Glaive Rush, followed up by another one to take out the fish. That is a 3-6 game. We'll look at the game state in a second, but I do need to deal with the Baxcalibur. I have to bring Hydreigon back in. I don't know if that Glaive Rush was a read, or if it's just the best thing he had to hit me with, but I'm just going to have to trust that it's all he has for me. Hopefully we can take one hit, and it is just a Glaive Rush. 52% damage before Baxcalibur goes down, with Screamtail coming in on the Revenge. Okay, so the game is now 3-5, and I have some work to do to catch up. However, I definitely have the tools to make this work. At this point, my 3 remaining Pokemon have incredible matchups against the rest of Joey's team. Hydreigon and Iron Moth in particular can beat just about everything if played correctly, and they also outspeed everything except for this Screamtail. Great Tusk in the back is kind of a bonus at this point, with Knockoff potentially being great utility, so I actually do kind of like my odds. Against the Screamtail, anytime Hydreigon is in on it, I can essentially limit it to making one move before it has to switch out, because I can Taunt, which is exactly what I'm going to do now. Light Screen does go up though. So I have limited this from doing anything else, so Slowking is going to come in, takes the Flash Cannon, but I do actually get the Special Defense drop. In hindsight, this really should have been a Dark Pulse. The switch was obvious, but this works out anyway. I can follow up with a Dark Pulse now for good damage. And this one actually flinches. Sorry about that. That is pretty lucky for me. I'll just Dark Pulse again, and this one is going to go and take it low, but does not flinch. I'll admit I was hoping for it, but that allows a Slowking to go and pivot into the Donphan. And I feel decently safe just going for the 2-hit KO behind the Light Screen here. I don't think Donphan has room in its moveset for Body Press or anything like that, so I'll go ahead and hit it. Dark Pulse is going to go in for more than half of its remaining health, and it does actually get off a pretty strong knockoff. That's actually pretty unfortunate. And then it gets to get some extra Ice Shard chip before I take it out. So without leftovers, Hydreigon is now capped out at 28%. I do think a better play would have been to go Great Tusk here. I wouldn't care as much about getting that thing's item removed, and I would probably still threaten the KO into Donphan. As it stands, though, this is still a decent position. Slowking heavily chipped, Donphan down, and Joey still has to deal with this Hydreigon. That'll be with the Screamtail again. And despite my leftovers being gone, I can take 2 more Dazzling Gleams, so I was very comfortable to just put the taunt back up as Light Screen goes back up as well. And this time I am actually prepared to make the Dark Pulse read. Slowking is the obvious switch in, but Dark Pulse gets really nice damage there. So let's just go for another one. But once again, it's the Screamtail back in to take it. Keep switching in and out, basically pivoting between the Regenerator and resetting the taunt that I have to put on it. I could taunt again at this point, but I'm seeing an easy KO with 2 Flash Cannons, so without Protect on this set, why not? The Screamtail Obviously, it is able to wish, but it cannot deal with the flash cannon coming its way, and this puts Joey into a pretty tough position. Screamtail doesn't have Protect, like I said, so it cannot stand to grab its own wish without just going down to my next attack. It's also at 11%, which is notably in Stealth Rock range, and those rocks are permanent with Donphan out of the picture. So if it passes the wish instead, that's the last thing it's doing in this battle. That should mean that attacking is a win-win and a guarantee that the Screamtail is done for, but I'm gonna make a bit of a bold play and switch out instead. Because looking at this from Joey's point of view, it looks like Screamtail is fated to go down no matter what, so he might as well pass the wish to something that can actually benefit from it. Electros would be able to actually come in and take a Dark Pulse from behind the screen, and then become very healthy and threatening, and that's a shot for Joey to get back into the game. I think I'd really like to prevent that, so I'll swap to Iron Moth, which should beat it, and as I do that, I do get the call correct. Electros comes in, and so does Iron Moth. It does get pretty healthy, but Screamtail is nothing but a sack now. That's amazing, and Light Screen is expiring. I should beat this. Sludge Wave is an easy 2-hit KO. Thunderbolt hits hard in return, but I can just Sludge Wave again for the KO. Slowking does make sense as the answer. I'm just going to U-turn out of that as I always do. Ooh, tough crit. But regardless, Hydreigon probably beats this, right? Slack Off makes sense. And then on the next turn, my Dark Pulse actually only does half as he goes for another Slack Off. I'm just going to Dark Pulse again to see if he's going to try to keep healing. But this one does actually flinch again. Once again, that's quite lucky, but I'm not sure how it would have played out had the Dark Pulse not flinched. I could have either kept going for those Dark Pulses. Maybe I could have taunted, but I might have just decided to keep fishing for that flinch, which at a 20% flinch rate, it was bound to happen in the next few turns. Still, I'll admit that this was a pretty nice break. I don't know the Slowking's full moveset, but if it had Surf, it might have been able to heal enough over the next few turns that it could take me out with it. As it stands, though, I can just Dark Pulse for a KO, but it makes sense. Screamtail is sacked to rocks for that Regenerator recovery on Slowking. But despite that, it still only comes in at 49%. Dark Pulse is enough. All that's left now is the Skeledirge, which is an easy KO with Stab Flash Cannon to take the game 3-0. Good game to Joey. I think that the first order of business is to award the easiest MVP of my life to Hydreigon, who stonewalled everything with Terra Steel, grabbed 5 KOs out of the 6, and basically carried the entire team this week. That said, there were definitely some flaws in my prep and play. The Azumarill mistake stands out, but allowing Dondozo to get chipped down as much as it did was also a pretty big mistake, given that Baxcalibur was just able to 2-hit KO it on the Switch. I think a bigger problem, though, was the lack of prep for that Screamtail. Until I figured out the Hydreigon plan, Wish and Screens were so hard to deal with for the first half of the game. I wish I had prepped a little more for that set, but honestly Joey just played it pretty well. Electros ended up being a way bigger plane than I thought it would be, and Baxcalibur was also about 40% of a Hydreigon away from taking the game straight up. I think that covers it. This was definitely my closest match yet this season, but the Noctowls are still undefeated for now at a 6-0 record. We got 2 weeks left. I'm already locked for playoffs, but I am now looking at grabbing that elusive undefeated regular season, which, if I remember correctly, hasn't been done since the Steamrollers made that feat in Season 8. The Noctowls have come close, only grabbing 1 regular season loss in each of Seasons 8 and 10, but we've never quite stuck the landing on it. That's the goal of this season. Week 8 is next against Michael and the 1-5 Kanto Kinglers. Here's hoping for another big win. I'll see you next time.